One of the most brutal events of Henry VIII's reign was the treatment of his fifth wife, Catherine Howard. When the king married Catherine, he was a grotesque and old man, but his bride was a young and carefree teenager. Quickly though, the Queen's attention shifted to other men, and she was accused of adultery behind the king's back. The two men she was accused of sleeping with, Thomas Culpeper and Francis Derham, were both executed for their involvement, being hanged, drawn and quartered. Catherine Howard herself was beheaded inside the walls of the Tower of London, but there was also another victim in the whole matter. Today we look at the story of Jane Boleyn, the Viscountess Rochford, and also Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law, who became embroiled herself in the Catherine Howard scandal. For this, she paid the ultimate price. So join us today as we look at the downfall and execution of Jane Boleyn, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Jane Boleyn was raised in Norfolk, and her family were rather wealthy and respected members of the upper class. Her father, Henry Parker, was a well-connected man, and through this he managed to secure Jane a place at court before the age of 15, and she joined the household of Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife. She even took part in a state visit to France, known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold. In the mid-1520s, she married George Boleyn, the brother of Anne Boleyn. At the time though, she was not linked to the king, but Anne was held in high regard at this time. The king as a wedding present had gifted Jane and George a mansion, Grimston Manor, and she was given the title Viscountess Rochford through her marriage. Jane Boleyn was most commonly referred to at court as Lady Rochford, and her family were incredibly powerful and wealthy, and as their influence continued, their riches grew, with more property and luxuries. Through marriage, Jane became the sister-in-law to the Queen, when Anne married Henry, and also she became an aunt to the future Elizabeth I. As Anne Boleyn's relationship with the Queen was good, as was George and Jane Boleyn's. However, when the Queen fell from grace, it would not end well for George, and Jane had a significant role in this. After 11 years of marriage, George was arrested and imprisoned at the Tower of London, being accused of incest with his sister and the Queen, and although there was no truth in the accusation, he was sentenced to death for this. Jane later allegedly testified against her husband due to the jealousy and closeness he had with his sister. She provided allegedly a false testimony that sent her husband to his death, but this fact has been disputed. Following George's beheading, which attracted a large crowd on Tower Hill, Jane was a widow. With the execution also of Anne Boleyn, the family was hit hard in their social status and also their wealth. The titles and land that had passed through George and the Boleyns had been lost, but Jane continued to use her title as Lady Rochford. Following her husband's execution, she disappeared from court for a number of months, spending time with her father-in-law Thomas Boleyn, and also Thomas Cromwell, securing her finances. She was given a generous pension of £100 a year, and this was enough to secure her status in court. Jane Boleyn later then became a lady-in-waiting for Jane Seymour, and returned to court life, but Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, would tragically die following childbirth. At court, Lady Rochford was very comfortable and was allowed a number of servants and was given a very lavish lifestyle from the Queen's household budget. Following Jane Seymour's death, Lady Rochford played a key part in allowing the king to annul his marriage to his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, as she told a trial that the Queen had told her in secret that she had never consummated the marriage with Henry. For this, the king then annulled this marriage and then married the teenage Catherine Howard. It was during this marriage that Jane Boleyn would fall from grace. Lady Rochford acted as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine Howard, Henry's teenage fifth wife, and they grew very close. However, Catherine had a number of indiscretions, and it was found that she had intimate relations before marrying the king. Also, it was rumoured that the Queen had relations with men behind the king's back. The Queen was then held under arrest in her apartments and taken to Sion Abbey for house arrest. Her closest friends and confidants were interrogated and questioned as to information that could implicate Catherine Howard of being guilty of adultery and cheating on the king. Lady Rochford Jane Boleyn was held for questioning and was found to have helped the Queen arrange meetings between her and Thomas Culpeper. Culpeper himself was close with Henry VIII, but Jane Boleyn had been helping Catherine Howard organise secret meetings with Culpeper, so Catherine and Culpeper could get together in these. Because of this, Jane was then thrown into the Tower of London and was interrogated greatly over the course of the next few months. In early 1542, Jane suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was declared insane. She had fits of frenzy and lost the concept of reality, and it meant that she could not legally stand trial in helping to facilitate the Queen's adultery. However, the King then implemented a law declaring the execution of the insane for high treason to in fact be legal. Henry then condemned Jane to death by an act of attainder, with her execution being set for the 13th of February 1542, the same day in which Catherine Howard would be executed. Catherine Howard was executed around 9 AM on the 13th of February and was beheaded inside the walls of the Tower of London on Tower Green. It took one blow for the Queen's head to be taken off, and now came the turn of Lady Rochford Jane Boleyn. Once Catherine's head had been taken off and her body taken to the chapel of St Peter ad Vincula, the scaffold was prepared for Jane's execution. She was described as someone who had aggravated the Queen's misdeeds the utmost because of her encouraging the Queen to meet with Culpeper in secret. The scaffold, which was covered in the blood of Catherine Howard, was washed down and fresh straw was brought. Then Jane came to meet her death. A record of the execution shows how Jane met her death with composure and bravery. She climbed the scaffold, pardoned the executioner as was customary, and then spoke to the crowd. Allegedly, she began by declaring her complete faith and trust in God. "I have," she said, "committed many sins against God from my youth upwards, and have offended the King's Royal Majesty very dangerously, so my punishment is just and deserved. I am justly condemned by the laws of this realm and by Parliament. All of you who watch me die should learn from my example and change your own lives. You must gladly obey the King in all things, for he is a just and godly prince. I pray for his preservation and beseech you all to do the same. I now entrust my soul to God and pray for his mercy." Jane Boleyn didn't refer to her specific misdemeanours and crimes, but she didn't have anything but praise for the King. Jane never confessed either for giving a false testimony about her husband George committing incest with his sister Anne Boleyn. It was then time for Jane to die. Lady Rochford removed her cloak, had her hair bound out of the way, prayed and then knelt as she was blindfolded. She knelt on the block and the executioner took her head clean off with one blow on Tower Green. The execution was straightforward, and this marked the end of Lady Rochford. Throughout her life, Jane Boleyn lived a rather fortunate life of affluence and wealth. She was closely linked to royalty and was a prominent member of court who meddled in the private lives of two queens, and her actions had huge implications. She participated in the downfall of Anne Boleyn and also in the downfall of Catherine Howard, which led to the executions of two queens. She met her end like so many, being executed for treason. However, she was allowed to die within the walls of the Tower of London, which was reserved for nobility and those of extremely high class. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.